at 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and begin. So welcome everyone to season 5 of ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, hey, what's your story? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty. I'm a cognitive scientist philosopher here at Illinois State University. Tonight we've come together to celebrate Latinx Heritage Month with a discussion of the award-winning graphic novel Monster Matador. If you're a student who's come here and you need a receipt for extra credit, please look into the chat. You'll see that I posted there. Send your name to this email address if you need receipt for extra credit. Make sure you tell me in that email where I need to send the extra credit to, if it's another email address or whatever, and I'll make sure you get that. So joining me in tonight's discussion is a crew of pop culture aficionados. First to enter the Zoom room was Edcel Cintron Gonzales. Edcel, please come in, tell everybody a little something about who you are, what you do, and why you love comics.
Hey everyone, good evening. I'm Edcel Cintron Gonzales. I'm currently doing my PhD at the English department, focusing on children's young adult literature. I also work in the social media for the department itself. And yeah, as part of my research, I love comics and graphic novels for a variety of reasons. I love the storytelling aspect. I really like how the visual cues really help us as readers understand hidden meanings that's going on within the visual narrative that not necessarily the written text tells us.
Hmm.
So I really like to think of comics as a way to explore the message behind the work itself. And that's what really fascinates me about comics in general.
That's fantastic. So glad you're here. Just to let the world know, Edcel and I have a history of doing ReggieCons together last year. Edcel played a major part in ReggieCon Live 2024, which was a major success. 13 different events over 4 days with people from all over the world. It's quite amazing. Also joining the panel tonight, Dr. Sara Rodan. Dr. Rodan, please come on in. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, and why you love comics.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Rodan, as I already said. I am a clinical psychologist, a professor and researcher in video games and pop culture. So I teach the new generations why we love pop culture, and it was as a tool for therapeutic healing. So in private practice, I do a lot of comics and VR as a form of therapy, one that is narrative therapy, which is called ACT.
No, it's
And I'm very
fantastic.
happy to be here.
One of the great things about, we call it pop culture, but TV shows, movies, comics, graphic novels, whatever, is their stories being told.
Yeah.
And it may be that person's story, and they can resonate to it and share it with you easily. And I would say that pop culture is doing a pretty damn good job of telling some really, really good stories these days. So just a quick thing before we bring this special guest in, just to let you know my relationship with comics. I do a lot of Comic-Cons. Dr. Roldan and I have been on panels in San Diego before. I teach a course called Welcome to Otherland, where I pick culturally sensitive graphic novels and I try to teach students to see the content relationally. How does the meaning of this visual moment here garner its meaning in relation to this visual moment here? And you can do that with comics at many scales, the visual, the textual, the cognitive, the social, in ways that it's very difficult to do in other media. So for me, comics are more than just entertainment. They're a fantastic pedagogical tool. And now, one and all, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome tonight's discussion, our special guest, author of Monster Matador, Stephen Prince. Stephen, please come on into the room, tell the audience a little something about who you are, what you do, why you love comics, and why you wrote this one.
Hey, I am the writer and creator of Monster Matador. I've been making and reading comics since I was a little kid, and this Monster Matador is a really special book to me. It's about a father really who's trying to raise his daughter in just a crazy violent world, and we do it under the backdrop of a matador that fights kaiju, and he's a matador from Mexico. At the time I created it, I was telling Edcel before that my ex-girlfriend was from Mexico. She's Mexican, so it made a lot of sense. But a lot of where the character came from was we had been watching a movie, and there was a stereotypical portrayal of Mexicans, and I remember distinctly her kind of slinking in her chair and just kind of groaning. And when I came up with this, I kind of I kind of did it with the mindset of saying I never want anyone to read this book and have that feeling, because I'm not Latino. My grandfather is from family from a long time ago, Spanish, and when I was a kid, he gave me a Matador hat. So that's where my fascinations with Matadors come from. So, so yeah, but
Well,
a lot of what you're, yeah.
I think we will find in our discussion tonight a lot of discussion about the cultural influences in Monster Matador, and part of what I always try to bring to this is looking at the text, the phenomenon at different scales. So there's the literal, and then there's the metaphorical, and then there's the subjective, what it meant to me, and I think that's fantastic. We're so glad that you're here. And now, before we start discussing, oh no, you're more than welcome. And before we start,
I'm excited. Thank you.
This amazing graphic novel, I have to share with you just a quick shout out to the amazing folks who actually make things like tonight possible. So Mr. Sean Thornton does all of the artwork for ReggieCon. You can see the beautiful image over my right shoulder. He does 8 of these a year. Absolutely outstanding. He's probably done about 30 or 40 of them now, because that's about how many episodes we've done. Dr. Jenna Albrecht is Director of Enrollment Management and Student Success here at Illinois State University. And their group has been supporting ReggieCon for the last 5 years, and we truly appreciate it. Jen is also one of the engineers who's usually here. So tonight she's not here, so I'm trying to be the moderator and the engineer, but we will be fine. Miss Summer Simmons, she's the one who sets up all the Zoom rooms, and she's also a second engineer usually. Miss Dani Schroeder works in university marketing and communications, has everything to do with advertising ReggieCon, as well as making sure that when we produce images, they're acceptable for the university, right? And then Miss Kelly Harmon works in the Department of Psychology, where I am, and what she does is manage the budget for ReggieCon, which is very, very important. And then Miss Julie Mana Perez actually produces. She helps me with social media, little reels that we post on Insta. The reels that we posted last year have gotten over 70,000 views. I know that may not sound like much in a real world, but for someone like me, it's pretty amazing. So we're funded tonight by the Harold K. Sage Fund, Office of Enrollment Management and Student Success, and the Department of Psychology. So I'm going to stop sharing a second, and then I'm going to explain to everyone what we do here. So I've asked each of the panelists to pick a favorite frame or a few favorite frames or pages or whatever from the graphic novel that I can then share with the audience, and that person will explain 2 or 3 minutes or however long you need why this was important. And then when they feel they're finished, the rest of us will chime in with a spontaneous discussion, and we'll do that all through the 3 of us tonight. We'll also be taking audience questions. Audience, if you have a question in the midst of the conversation and you think it'd be a good idea that we ask it like now, then just put it in the chat, and I'll do my best to keep up. And my colleagues, if you'll help me say, yo, Scott, Joe, there's someone in the chat, we'll go from there. So the first images, when I sent Dr. Roland this book, I immediately received a whole bunch of images from her saying, I love all of these. So I'm going to share those with you now, and she will tell you why she loved them. That's yours, correct?
Yes, that's the first one. Yeah.
So go ahead. Because I thought you said this was the one you liked the most. Am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
So for Wrecker, I'm from Guatemala, and this is exactly from there. And the image that you're seeing actually is Tikal, and that one is a very iconic national park that we have for the whole wide world, and also was in episode 4 in 1977 in Star Wars, so it's super famous.
Okay.
And when you put it in there and it's so green and the pyramids are there, also in May, we have something that is called Sampopos that is actually look like that. It's a big ant that comes and eats things and destroy things. So when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, he put the thing for real. And then also I love the representation of my people, physically speaking. Like I love how you represent the males in the horses and whatnot. So mostly what I love is I was like, and I even asked, I was like, has he been in Guatemala? Because he did an excellent job putting it in the graphics and in the art.
Yeah, well, and Stephen, if any point you want to respond, please go
Yeah.
ahead.
I'll tell you, it's an interesting page because Fabio Alves, who's the artist, um, he did a fantastic job, and I had given him reference for the ruins. But it's interesting you say that about the features of the people because it was very important. And I remember it was kind of funny because I sent him pictures of Guatemalans that I had, and his response was, "Don't worry, don't worry. I'll give you some good Guatemalans. Don't worry about it." He lives in Brazil, so it's nice to hear that he did get it right because that was again something that was really important. But we really wanted to make it, the representation of the people in the book to actually feel like they were from that place and not just a generic kind of um, people. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and I love, Guatemala is one of the few places that it concerns around 60% of indigenous pure blood people.
Hmm.
So what
Yeah,
you're seeing is a Mayan person. And I love that
right.
you're not putting it like a killer and stuff. I mean, he does kill,
Mm.
but not like,
Yeah,
they put it in the movie. So I do
yeah, yeah.
appreciate that a lot.
Oh,
I mean,
thank
that's
you.
something I'm going to talk about later is the trope of the male protector, right? And
Hmm.
it's very real. And I'm sure everybody has opinions one way or another about the male protector. At the same time, as a male, I feel like a protector. I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
be
yeah,
honest with you. And it's not like my wife wasn't, right? It's not like she wouldn't kick someone's butt who tries to mess with the kids.
yeah.
But nonetheless, there's still that there. And yeah, like we'll talk more about that when I get to my images. So I'm gonna keep going with Sarah's here because she had a bunch of them. So Sarah, why'd you pick this?
Oh, so again, my country, right? In which, for people that don't know, Mexico and Guatemala, they're next to each other, like United States and Mexico. And we have the same love-hate relationship, you know? So we are Mexico and Mexico is United States.
Mm.
But this is a bank. Actually, it's a chain of banks that exists in Central America. And when I saw, I was like, how? I swear, I was like, did he went to like visit and stuff? Because they always put them in the corners, because
Yeah.
they prevent for assaults and stuff like that. So they always put them in the corner. So when I saw this image, the art, it was like it bring me nostalgia. I haven't been back home for a while. So when I saw this, like, oh, my home is like painted for posterity. It,
Mm.
it just was beautiful.
Oh, cool.
That's Stephen, did you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's great to hear that because I did do a lot of research and I know, with Fabio, I sent him a lot of research and I know he takes a lot of pride in getting stuff. So it's just nice to hear that, you know, we got this stuff right. And,
Right.
because it was important. Again, we didn't want it to be a generic place. We wanted it to feel like it was really, uh, it was really Guatemala. So.
Yeah, what I love about the phone bit is if you're someone who grew up in a time where you actually used payphones,
Mhm.
there was a way you felt about life, about how things were from you in space and time that's different than we feel now with cell phones.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not here to say, I'm not one of those people who say, oh, back in my day, blah, blah, blah. But this image of actually taking the time to apply the appropriate amount of pressure to make sure you press the right button.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't look like there's a coin slot there, but I remember the days of the coin slots. you couldn't work at the pace of a cell, right? Your life couldn't work that fast. Your life had to work
Right.
analog at the speed of these were
Mhm.
probably predominantly wire systems at the time. And it constrained the pace of life in ways that you just feel coming flooding back when you see someone actually pressing buttons on a thing like that. And then when you nest this in the idea of a tragedy, it probably makes it a bit more intense because you can't deal with the world as fast as you can with a cell phone. You've got to run to the phone booth and press the buttons. So I thought that was a nice world building context setting part is certain things slow down when you have to deal with the world that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add as well, just because I remember growing up back in Puerto Rico, we had these phones too when I was younger, and I remember how loud they were every time you press the buttons. And so definitely the beep really caused my nostalgia to be like, wow, I remember touching these and using these like at public spaces at the mall. But going back to the comic, I was also interesting because I kept wondering, like, since the buttons do make a loud sound, I was wondering if that would attract any of the monsters, like to the location of the person using the phone. So in that moment in the comic, the suspense was also there,
Okay.
kind of like, oh no, like I know they need to communicate, but what if they get caught by the monsters and that would have meant nothing? Like that, what I mean. So
Yeah,
it kept
yeah.
my toes, like kind of like reading, oh, what happens next? What happens next?
It's interesting how people bring their own experience to it. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Oh,
Yeah,
my,
go ahead.
uh,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was like, why did you pick ants? Again, I don't know if you knew this, that in our country we have these humongous ants that we call
Yeah,
some.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was like, this is great. We finally get to revenge them. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we mixed it with the fly just to kind of give it a little more. But yeah, it was I like I said, I did the research and I know there were like huge
yeah.
things. So we wanted to whenever I
Mm.
do the monsters, I try to give it a little flavor of where it's from, so that it has a little more, I guess, authenticity or something. But
Oh yeah. I mean, and there's the whole, I mean, back in the 50s, there were a lot of sci-fi movies about radioactive
yeah,
bugs
yeah,
that grew big. And so the quote unquote monsters are a reflection of some kind of cultural trauma, some kind of
yeah, yeah,
cultural phenomena. And
yeah.
the fighting them is the point. I'm gonna quickly see what I got here on Sarah's next image. Yeah, I I'm gonna say this is Sarah. Sarah, if it's not, you just let me know and I'll get in trouble. Um, is that
No, that's
yours?
fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
So again, I appreciate all the artwork, but mostly their presentations because because in Chiquimula is where you get the most of popos, and that's where you have like Guatemala has 27 active volcanoes, so it's not unfeasible. We always make jokes that there is monsters inside, and that's why they're always active. But the fact that you put it in there and the little uh, uh the interaction between the three males is a
Hmm.
real interaction that will happen in real life. Again, like I
Mm.
said,
Yeah,
Mexico is like United States for us, and then Spanish is the same, right? And we're always the help. So that representation in there, it was very iconic for the cultural discord that we live.
yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, like I said, it's great. It's great to hear that perspective because uh, especially today where just in the like one of the things when I was not necessarily researching, but you start paying attention. It's so many books that when they do a Latin America country, it's always Santa or whatever, and everyone dresses in kind of like white rags, and there's a generalissimo, and it's this trope you see over and over and over and over again. And so again, that was just something we really just wanted to avoid completely for a lot of reasons, but also even Angelo, what he the shirt that he wears is the design is a Guatemalan kind of, I can't think right now, but like he wears the pants too, a
Yes.
traditional
Yeah.
a traditional outfit.
Yeah. They're
And
all
yeah,
with peels in every region. We have 22 states, and those are
right.
regions. And they had 22 different indumentaries. Normally, the most opulent, kind of like your heroes, if you will, they wear
Hmm.
that indumentary. Like if you notice the art, it's just I was in love of the art because seeing my people there, and I'm like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
good me in a good place. Where they put the pants. The pants have like this black and red, because
Hmm.
they're wave and like the art, it was excellent representation to the T of and I think I put another one that about or high too. That was
Yeah.
very, very funny. I laughed so hard when I saw that because I'm like, thank you.
I love when we talk about the detail of clothing, the detail of a building, and how much richness there is culturally in there. And it's not always that those things make us feel happy or sad, but they make us feel embedded, right?
Hmm.
And th that's precisely why the Matador outfit was created,
Right.
was to bring a group together around a common phenomenon. Whether or not, however one feels regarding bullfighting, the point is that
Right.
culture will organize itself around it, just like we do holidays and other things.
Hmm.
And, as a psychologist, and I'm not a therapist, I'm a cognitive psychologist, the brain doesn't care what patterns stay the same.
Right.
So if you're with your friends and you go to these events and there's a ritual associated with the event, you don't think I've got to remember this event. You don't think I've got to recreate nostalgia for 20 years from now. It just happens to you because it happens over and over. And so, like, Edcel's saying he sees a picture of a phone and he sees words ring and he's filled with anxiety, right? Because he's been in
Hmm.
that space before and he
Yeah.
knows they might wake the monsters up. So I just love how little information we really need to just trigger this entire world of wealth. Yet when it comes to representation, the more coherently we do it, the more the wealth we can generate, the richness we can generate in the reader. And I just find it amazing that we can do that by drawing on a page some words. Sarah, I think I have another issue, another image of yours. But
I
no, I love the.
think
Go ahead.
the first issue completely was like in love. Yes, there you go, that one.
So this is the next one of yours, correct?
Yes. And I love this one because the facial structure that you put in.
Hmm.
I don't know if people can see, but we have a special Mayan nose that all of us were very, well, depends. We're very proud or not of it, but we never see it, in like the
Mm.
movies or in media. They
Hmm.
always put the typical, like the one that you have in the pyramids, but all of us, we have evolved, but our Mayan features having changed, and you can tell again by the high and by certain features that we are from there. Also how nice he was in this story, I was like, yep, that's us, we're very nice at fault. And how he knew the area, the greenery, the where to go in the road, because we don't need GPSs. We are very connected with our roots in our land. So that image particularly, I love one again because you can see the whippeal that he's wearing. That is a male one, and also the beautiful color of their skin, because yes, we're a little brown, but we also a little olive and a little yellow,
Mm.
and a lot of times we don't get that. And I thank you because now with this comic, with all my Latino and Hispanic communities, I
Hmm.
can start talking about like representation and how we look, and
Yeah.
especially when they're first third generations and we are trying to reconnect the family. This is
Hmm.
how we reconnect them, through a comic
Mm.
book, and talking like, oh, tell me more about the why this looks like you and not like me, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really nice. Like I said, Fabio Alves, who did the artwork, and Alex Zief, who did the colors. And Fabio is from Brazil.
Mhm.
Alex is from Mexico. And that was really important to me, to make sure that, because we were doing a book that took place in Guatemala with a Mexican lead, and, that we had representation, because and I give all the credit to that to them, because, that's their culture, and one of the things I noticed as I worked with a lot of Latino artists is that, especially with the Matador stuff, they take a great amount of pride in it. But even just like, there's something about the body language, the visual, it's these tiny, 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 tiny little things that, but they make all the difference, and you really do see the difference. And so yeah, all that credit for that really goes to Alex and Fabio. They did such a great job, and I didn't really give them much direction on that, because on that, like, I sort of trusted them to be able. But I remember, originally, and even now, Fabio, Alex gets really excited to color the book, because it's something that she feels a connection with, like she gets it's. And that obviously that means a lot to me, and with Fabio as well. It's something they both take a lot of pride in, and so that just makes me also work harder to make sure I get it right. But
well, you have
yeah,
now a full fan from Guatemala proving
great, thank you.
Right? Because
yeah.
I was born and raised down there. I came to the United States as an adult, so
yeah.
I'm very ingrained in my culture. And when I saw that, I was like, I love this book.
That's awesome. Edcel, do you want to say anything? I'm just making sure everybody has opportunity. If you don't, that's fine. We can move on.
No, I'm just loving the conversation about representation. Just because I think it's so essential, especially, being a scholar, studying Latinx literature, more specifically in children's and young adult and youth literature in that sense. And what it's really interesting, because and this is just, and if any of my students are in the audience, like, they're probably heard of this already, but when I talked the other days, when I talked about Encanto and how detrimental it was for representation, not only for little kids but also adults as well, and how the characters represented, there is, for example, their roles in the family, like being the older sibling, carrying all that pressure and weight, and what it means to basically have on your shoulders, like, the family pressure and upholding that, and what it means to helping your parents take care of your siblings, and that dynamic. So representation is not, it is important to see yourself represented, but also, how is it also integrated within the storyline as well, and how is it making a mirror reflection of your own lived experience as you were growing up? And I feel like children and youth not only benefit from that, but us as adults, we can benefit of that as well, because reading a lot of these different books, that's where I reclaim a lot of my memories and see a lot of my experiences when I was growing up. So I'm just loving this conversation and how well represented it is.
Yeah, a total nerd moment here. When we talk about brains and we talk about seeing, we like to think of brains as computers, and you're doing a pixel analysis, but that's not what's going on at all. Your brain is much more like a plant than it is like a computer. Your plant is absorbing nutrients through the ground. It's resonating with the context that it's in, and we're much better at thinking of brains as resonating systems. And what do they resonate with the most? What they've been exposed to the most. So you don't even have to try to fall in love with a culture. You just be in a culture, you live in it, you work in it, and it becomes how your brain works. And so for me, the issue regarding representation is, if you're an artist, how much do you want your audience to resonate with what you've done? Now, the beautiful image that you just mentioned, Sara, I saw it for the first time, and I guarantee you I didn't experience it the way you did.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason I didn't experience it the way you did is because I wasn't surrounded growing up with those faces. right?
Mhm.
And one thing I love about this conversation is that it admits to where difference is and where it comes from. Difference exists and it comes from life. And the issue isn't is difference right or wrong, good or bad. To be honest, natural selection favors diversity. The more we have different people in a group, the more likely we are to survive. At the same time, you can't help what you resonate to. You can't help what makes you feel nostalgic because it's what your brain formed around. So I love the fact that you had a response to it that I'm sure I didn't have the same depth of emotional reaction because I didn't resonate to the differences in that face versus other Latin American faces. That's amazing. So we're doing a cognitive science presentation here as well as
Right. And you know, it is because again, they just pile all Latinos in the same context, and each one of us comes from a different indigenous tribe with specific traits in the art, and even the jokes and the story was like make you so nostalgic, and talking about neuroscience is the whole thing, and neurons that stay together fire together.
Yes.
So like, even though that is a image, I felt identified and fight all my neurons fire up to like,
Yes.
oh, that's one of my, they have even the bad words that you put there. I was laughing because I was like, oh my God, I have years I haven't seen this in print. Actually, I have never seen in print here in the United States.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the fact that you put it, I was like, oh my goodness. You know, my little child in me, I was like, oh my God, he's gonna get in trouble
Yeah.
for. But I'm like, wait, nobody knows what it is. But it
Yeah,
starts a conversation, you know,
Yeah.
how a funny word in Spain means one thing, and Latin
Right.
America means another thing, and in my country it's just like, nah. So it was beautiful. And I know I have a very visceral reaction in a good way, you know,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I just love it.
No, that's
So,
cool. Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
mean, I until you said that about the noses, I hadn't noticed it either. I'm gonna have to tell Fabio. But that's great, you know, and
Yes.
that's, I mean, he's great. I mean, you know, like I said, one of the reasons I picked Guatemala and we put it in Puerto Barrios, which is a seaport, is specifically because it's such a diverse area. You have, you said like Mayan, you have like Afro Latino, you have, so there's a whole diverse thing, and I thought that was kind of really cool to see all of that together. So
When I just stuck on this nerd moment of resonating to your past. It goes in the culture that I grew up in, most of the people on television were white, and there are differences in how white people look from Europe, right? There are French ways of looking there,
yeah.
but the way that I ever felt the most seen was this movie called oh gosh, oh no, I can't forget I can't remember the movie. But it was a little 13-year-old kid, grew up in a middle class neighborhood, out partying with the juniors and seniors in high school. Dazed and Confused is what it was
Oh
called.
yeah.
It had a 1970s soundtrack. And I thought, oh my God, that's me, smarter than all those seniors, not getting paddled by these weirdos, but nonetheless finding a way to party with all the older kids. And those are things that I did, right? And you resonate to them and you don't even have to try, right? I think that's why it's so robust. And that's why, people say representation matters, and it does. And I'm delighted. I mean, in the United States, let's just be honest, our entertainment and our art structure is privatized. So people are making things that they believe will maximize their money. And I'm not going to blame anybody for trying to make money. I'm delighted. I take the fact that we're seeing so much representation as somewhat of a reflection of diversity and wealth in the country, right? Groups that maybe didn't have access to putting their work out there have access to putting their work out there. And dare I say, that was part of the dream of creating a thing called the United States in the first place. So, and one more nerd thing, and I'll shut up. But the data are clear. The more you're exposed to difference early on, the more you can handle it. Right. And what would it be like if our kids grew up resonating to difference as opposed to similarity? I'm blathering now. I'm going to stop. Sarah, I don't know. Is this the last image of yours?
Um,
Or is this not yours?
Yeah, that's mine. That's Puerto Warriors. That's the one that was
Okay.
Yeah,
saying that it's a mix of everybody. And like
yeah.
the bottom one, where you can see the mix of people.
Mm,
Like you say, we have Afro
yes.
mestizos, we have Mayans, we have mix of Spanish, and then we even have Filipino mix in there too.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's like the melting pot. And also the streets in like I said, you did your research obviously, but it was like the moon, everything, even the little slogans that you have that they are
Hmm.
not the exact, but they are, like it's just
Yeah,
cognitively speaking, we can take one or two letters and our brain completes
Yeah.
the rest.
Right.
Um, and that's what exactly this image did. And you have the beautiful houses that they're not like your American houses because it's a port in a very opulent port, but at the same time it's not.
Mm,
So the fact that you have the patches and the people just living the life because Puerto Barrios and Livingston are a nightlife place.
hmm.
mm.
And not to ruin the story, but like the part you did in the art in the bar and all that, it was like I say, the first book I was like, oh my gosh, I love this book, and I like just went over and over in the images.
Mm, that's awesome. And again, I didn't see the detail that you just mentioned. I saw the images, but I didn't have the richness of the understanding the differences that you just did. I think that's absolutely amazing. Anyone else on that image?
No, that's one of my favorite parts in the book. But yeah, there's when I started researching like Guatemala and picking the place and picking all, it's funny because every like the story just kind of fell into place. It's kind of it was kind of nice. But I because I knew I wanted something on a beach because I wanted a battle on the beach that was like a at
Mm,
night, and just everything fell into place, which I is in the third issue or whatnot. But
yeah,
um,
that's awesome. We're gonna go on to Edcel's images, and I do think this is yours. Please tell me if I'm wrong.
oh,
Yes.
All right. So let me ask you guys. No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm gonna make see if I make this bigger on my screen, does it get bigger on yours? Did that get bigger on your screen at all? It did. Okay. Makes it easier to read. All right. Go ahead, so.
Yeah, so I was really fascinated by this panel specifically for a number of reasons. Growing up with my mom and grandma, we used to watch a bunch of telenovelas when I was little. So this really reminded me of a classic telenovela trope. Kind of like, why do you have to go fight? You're gonna leave our son fatherless, and kind of like that fear that goes with it as well. That and it's interesting because when I was when I'm researching in youth literature, a lot of more contemporary graphic novels, there's always the father missing, and it's always to highlight the relationship of like the female child protagonist and their mom as a kind of way to fix their relationship, whatever happened in that story. But on the offset, we never really get a chance to see the father or fatherly relationship because the dads in most of the readings I've been reading, they either die in a car accident or not in the lives of, the kid or the mom in that sense. And I've always felt like there's a stigma within the Latinx community.
Mm,
The father figure is always missing for some reason or another. So besides the novella and these tropes that really brought up my nostalgia, I really felt the sadness within this panel as well. Because again, it's like, you know, as an empowering male character, as a provider, as a protector, he has this responsibility to protect his family, but also his community and his people. But it's also the sadness that comes that he might not come back alive to see
mm,
his child growing up or support his wife and his family in that sense. So when I read this panel, I really thought of like the sadness that comes with these kinds of tropes and kind of like the empathy I felt as reading these characters and living them as representative that, that that's not gone. And this is like me thinking of like dismantling the stereotype that not every time that dad's a deadbeat, not every time that dad leaves
Yeah.
because, he just wants to and doesn't want to take part of the family. And in this specific panel, it's because he acknowledges that, I have the power to make a change and not only our family's life better, but the community's life better. So I felt that resonating while reading this panel.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, telenovela is definitely a big influence, but it's that's a trope that we definitely explore a lot of in the book as it goes on. And obviously, Matador's being very macho culture. One of the things we wanted to show with Angelo too is sort of how that um, you know he's kind of going in and because he's trying to be tough, he's got to be the man or the and a lot of it is pushed along by this other Matador who's kind of like putting him down, so he feels like he has to prove himself, and it's how this kind of macho-ness, the toxic masculinity leads sometimes to bad decisions and bad places, and that's part of the overall story, because even the Matador who is as a father in these early series, he's left his daughter with his brother-in-law because he's going to fight the monsters, even though, as we find out later, he himself was abandoned as a child. And then in the series that's coming up, we'll find out why, and it's not exactly the reason that he thought. And there's all this baggage that's carried because it's sometimes it's covered up with all this macho-ness, but rather than confronting it, it just becomes a bigger and bigger burden, right? And that's kind of like what we were going for with that, is showing like the burden that these men sometimes have to carry, because of that.
Yeah. And it's also interesting how the hypermasculinity is also used as a sort of shield also to hide that as well, the baggage.
Right.
And the emotion, well, yeah, and the emotional baggage that comes with those decisions. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It is terribly fascinating when you look at the suicide rate of U.S. vets from our involvement in the Middle East. And one of the reasons it's so bad, and what I might say might come across as controversial, but we have a culture that subsidizes armies. And I'm fine with that. I'm going to stay right now. I'm fine with us having a military. Um, and when we do this and people end up doing things that lead to violence, they have to live with that forever.
Yeah.
But when they come back from a patrol, do we immediately provide counseling? Do we immediately provide them an inoculation cognitively against having to toe the line? I mean, one of the problems is you keep re-traumatizing yourself the more you talk about it. So the thing to do is to be stoic, to not talk about it.
Right.
And then you come back to the non-war context, and the vets are right. People don't understand. And it's not their fault that they don't understand. They weren't there, they didn't live it. So you have this situation that cultures have known about forever. We've known about it. And why don't we have counselors in military systems that are actually requiring soldiers to go through some kind of debrief emotionally when they're finished, and to know that the work they're doing is being respected? This is not the way we talk about these things, right? And it's too bad, because then we say, oh, they're traumatized, PTSD, they just can't blend. Well, that's because we haven't created a system that they can blend into. And that's the suicide rate for these young men. And I don't have data on women, but the suicide rate is just abysmal. And I hate to say, love your killers, but this book is paying a lot of respect to cultural, and they say it themselves, killer. We don't like to use that trope because we get all moralistic on it until we want to save a system. And, once we want to save a system, then we come up with reasons why the violence is the world's fault. But in fact, there are things we want, and I think I'm going to it now, but I think when we look at what people are willing to use violence to protect, it's usually a kin gradient, right? It starts very locally and extends out a little further, and then at some point it gets connected to something called a culture or a state. Um, those are very real psychological boundaries. Those are real teams. So I don't think we talk about these things in this way, and I think that's why these young people end up alone in very desperate situations. I'm not trying to say it's okay to kill people. That's not what I'm saying.
No,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
saying that systems sustain themselves by protecting boundaries, and these things happen. And if we want to have a system, you got to have boundaries. Okay, I'm going to shut up on that, but go ahead, Sarah. I thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and I want to add to, I work in private practice actually with active duty and first responders.
Hmm.
And I use comics. In this one, I was like, I already tapped a whole bunch of little pages that we
Oh,
will
wow.
use to talk about moral injuries, which is exactly what you described so beautifully, that we go join the biggest gang in the world and go and attack and violent and murder people. And that is offense to our morals and to it
Mm.
creates an injury that nobody else can understand except the Matador, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
when they were like, not to ruin the ending or anything, but when they were like the blue Matador and the red Matador together and stuff like that, I was like, yep, I don't believe in bad people. I believe in people that's traumatized and reacts to those
Yeah.
traumas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that as a portrait of masculinity that went untreated with trauma. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will be using it for my male
Oh, wow.
That's
duty.
awesome.
Well, we can get together later, but I'm happy to send you also some books. Yeah.
Awesome. Edcel, I think you have another image. Is this it? Because I told you you get to do both of those. Is that yours?
Yes.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. Okay.
I love that one.
No, I completely loved it for a lot of different reasons. Like, and the first thing I thought is that, and this was really emotional for me because um this month of September is very emotional because we celebrated the anniversary of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and that was the moment when I realized that the community will always band together and support and help each other times of crisis. And this is a perfect example of this as well. But so besides the community joining each other and band together to fight these monsters, I especially like the text and the humor behind it as well. Like get the women and children to the shelters, found out every able-bodied man you can, and I really love the use of inclusive language as well. I thought that was incredible. And then when the only woman was there, like, hey, macho, this woman's staying to fight. She took everything from me. And then it's like every able-bodied person. Sorry, Rosa, I'm from a different time. So I thought that was like really witty in terms of the text, but it also served the purpose that, regardless of regardless of gender identity, regardless, you know, you're here for a purpose, you're here to band together, you're here with a reason you wanna, and you know obviously with Rosa's perspective, she wants revenge, she wants to make amends because the monsters took everything from her, and I know what that
Mhm.
feeling is because with thinking again of the hurricanes and Maria, a lot of people lost everything because of that. So I see the monsters as a metaphor of what it feels like when you lost completely everything and what you can do as an individual. What is your driving force to move forward and make a difference in the world? And I really felt that in Rosa's character and her urge and want to fight alongside these men, um, and to basically defeat the evil that's in front of them. And I love the last section of this panel. This will be our last stand. And give me a second. My pages are blurring a little bit.
Sure.
This will be the last stand for some of you. I'm sorry, there is no time to make peace or spend a quiet moment with your loved ones. It is an honor to stand with you and that felt really meaningful because most likely it's like for a lot of these people, they probably know like they won't live to tell the tale fighting these monsters. But
Mhm.
what's important is that they're contributing their own effort into achieving the bigger goal, which is like, eventually defeating these and make sure that the community has a brighter future for their children and for everyone. So I was really motivated when I saw this panel, and it really made me look forward to read the rest of the
Oh,
book.
cool.
I gotta say, I actually picked this panel too. And I love the line, we can't afford to live in the past when we are fighting for our future. There's so many layers of just cool smartness going on in that page because, yeah, an older guy does say something that a younger generation doesn't accept. They call him out and he says, okay, you're right. I'm from a different time. I'm sorry. We should be teaching people that how to do that every day. I
Yeah.
mean, it's so easy. And,
Yeah.
and it's like all of us, like, for example, all this whole conversation we've had about living in a world and absorbing it, right? We don't try to absorb a culture, we just do. And including all the speech habits, all the thought structures of the people we're raised around. So if someone's going to use, all men, let's go fight, that's what they were raised around. And if we're living in a time now where there are other people that are not being raised around that, then it makes perfect sense for them to say, we're not living it that way. But when you say, when you judge the person who made that, I guess we'll call it a microaggression because that's the common parlance for that.
Right.
When you judge them instantly, or when you act as if they shouldn't have done it, the question I have is, what is going to be your microaggression 20 years from now? What
Right.
are you going to say 20 years from now that your kids won't accept because they're living in a different context than you would? So build this page just is full of what I'd just like to call good old-fashioned grace, right? It's like, yeah, oh, I acknowledge that you lived in a different time. I acknowledge I lived in a different time. Okay, let's get this all sorted out because we got to fight this thing. This one page is a lesson for contemporary America.
Yeah.
We have things that we need to fight for if we want certain things to persist. And infighting and judging each other for different contextual systems isn't what's going to be successful. I think we're more likely to be successful with grace and affording grace and dare I say modeling it, man. Just, showing the world, hey, oh yeah, okay, I get it. I'm sorry, I'm from a different world. I won't do that again. Yes. But all the yelling at someone, you did this to me, you said that to me, and that's wrong. You're not acknowledging the fact that I come from a time. And then the question I always have, as I always said, what's going to be your macroaggression in your time? Because you're going to
Yeah.
be just as vulnerable to mislabeling things that when you're in your 40s and 50s, because the kids in the 20s are going to be different and living life then. So this page is a grace lesson, I would
Yeah.
say, and I
It's
dig it. Yeah.
That's fun. It's a pet peeve of mine because I feel like sometimes people react aggressively in ways when, again, I grew up in a time, you grew up in a time, there are things that were in the language when we were younger that we've grown up and matured and understand why they're wrong and why we don't use them anymore or whatever, and these are things that are constantly evolving. I think that's a great point to say, well, what is, when you're 40, you're 20
Right.
now, but when you're 40, because that's just how the world works. It's
Yeah.
not, change is not immediate, right? It's an
Mhm.
evolution. And so, yeah, it's something, it's a little thing that like that line, I'm glad you guys picked that out because that was something that was very specific because it's something I see so much, those reaction. It's like, I think if we're just a little nicer to each other, it kind of goes a
Yeah.
long way because what it is, it just forces people, it makes them dig in even more and gets them so defensive and aggressive as opposed to, just being like, okay, I get it. You're right.
Yeah. No. And
So
look at how pissed off our kids get when we
yeah,
start trying to use their language, right?
yeah,
Why
yeah,
does
yeah,
that
yeah,
matter?
yeah.
Because they've got to
Mhm.
distinguish themselves from adults. They have to be them,
Right.
not us. So all
Yeah.
groups are creating these boundaries
Mhm.
necessarily to identify yourself in a larger context. Oh, I'm this, I'm that, not
Mhm.
that. And we don't like the idea I'm not that, but that's how the system works. And to be honest, if you're not if there's something that you're not, then you tend to be diagnosed as schizophrenic, right? Because you have to be able to distinguish yourself from the not self.
Yeah.
And that's most of the business of a brain. So recognizing that we're all managing these boundaries and borders all the time and that they're sacred, man. They're sacred to us, then we recognize our borders and boundaries are contextual. And there'll be a different context later. And the question is, don't lean into your boundaries so much that you think you're right. Um, Blathering on another public service announcement. But I love how it all just came up, in this one little exchange, just before the moment of truth. Any other comments about that frame? All right, then what I'm going to do, because I actually picked that, I actually then picked this. Let me see how I've got this. Yeah, I've picked this series of images. This is where um, she's not going to be trained until she learns poetry. When you learn Kung Fu, when you learn a sacred martial art, you don't just learn to fight. You learn how to move your body in ways, you learn how to be and think in ways that are much more sophisticated than just reacting. And so, like, Kung Fu itself, I will call if I call it spiritual, the Western world will not understand what I'm saying. But it's embodying a worldview, right? And that's what this gentleman is doing here. You have to embody a worldview. And part of that worldview is poetic. Part of that worldview is experiencing yourself as part of a bigger culture, a linguistic culture, a linguistic habit. And I just loved that in there because on the one hand, you have a trope and of the Matador, which can easily slide into toxic masculinity, right? And at the same time, if one is going to be a protector, if one is actually going to be a person who puts one's life on the line for others, there's a whole ritualistic world that goes with that. That's why there's so many ceremonies in the military. This is why I think there needs to be more ceremonies for first line protectors, right? For the first line workers, we need to ritualize what they're doing and not act like it's just daily life, because it's not. These people are fighting for us, be it disease, fire, earthquake, whatever. They're fighting for us all the time. And the more we ritualize it, the more we're paying respect to their sacrifice. So this is just a continuation of that whole discussion. But I love the fact that the idea of poetry was brought in and embedding I'm going to use a word, but it's being poetic, embedding the killer in the larger structure of the community, as opposed to saying, oh, you chose to be a killer, we don't respect you. That's betrayal, right? If you're going to live off of a system that's being defended by certain people, there's a certain I will say is I don't say you have to respect people. I would say I prefer that you respect the people that are doing that life work. Just we don't talk about it enough, but imagine what it was like to being a nurse during COVID.
Yeah.
For Christ's sake, and where are the movies? Where's the public documentary and the stories about all that suffering, right? I mean, because these people, they were mortified, the amount of death that they were seeing, and the type of choices they had to make. They need to have those experiences ritualized for them so that they know there's a place they can go emotionally and psychologically where they feel respected or they don't feel alone. And that's what the ritual does. So no, I absolutely love that this became part of the story.
Thanks. That's one of my favorite pages that I wrote. And one of the reasons I did it was, again, because culturally there's the cultural aspect of bullfighting, and I didn't want it to be reductive to just be like, okay, he's a killer, he's fighting bulls and it's horrible, and you can have your opinion on it or whatever, but there is a cultural aspect in terms of the tradition and the whole pomp of it. It's the acts, it's a 3-act almost structure to it, and with picadors and all this stuff, and it's people focus a lot on the killing of the bull when it's so much more than that, at least from a cultural perspective, in terms of the story that it's telling, you know. So that was an important thing for me to kind of get in there, and it's also very dramatic, you know. I guess adds a little bit of
that tradition of a public execution of a bull. That's at a point where people were killing their own food.
Right.
It was a time when that was part of life, is actually taking life. And it's so removed from 95+% of all of our lives now. None of us has ever come close to having to do something like that. So we go, oh, like this. But there's a certain amount of respect to be had for people that understand how the sausage is made, literally, and then carry themselves. Because when you're in that business, you carry yourselves differently regarding organisms than you do. If you're a culture that hunts, you have a spiritual, ritualistic experience about hunting and killing that you don't have when you just go buy it at the grocery store. And we're not going to get into a big, long discussion about the pitfalls of capitalism right now, but the de-ritualization of death is one of them, right? So, wow, what a great conversation. It's about 8 o'clock. We have time for questions from the audience. There you go, everyone. Dr.
It immediately kicked me out and then rejoined.
So what's your question or comment, Emilio?
Actually,
First of all, it's great to see you again, man.
Yeah, fantastic to see you again. We definitely have to catch up, Scott.
We do.
But my question is actually a continuation of that last panel and what Scott was talking about the relationship between the martial art of being a bullfighter and the cultural and social and political and all of that background and baggage. Because from my vantage point as a consumer of art, it is very easy for artists in the visual arts, whether that's comic books or movies or TV, to fall into the trap of separating the spectacle of the visual aspects of the martial art from the rest of that cultural context and religious context or whatever for any given martial art. So I did want to ask you, how do you maintain vigilance that you're doing justice to the martial art that you're depicting in Monster Matador?
Oh, that's a good question. It's gosh, I don't even know where to start. It's the idea of it is you know, for the Matador himself, because of his trauma and his baggage, he's always telling his daughter that, you know, he's a killer and he doesn't want her to be that.
Yep.
And Arturo, who's the brother-in-law, is more poetic. He's more in terms of the cultural stuff, you know. So there's there's a lot of back and forth. We always we contrast it between the two, I guess, and that's how we usually bring it into the story, because the Matador himself, you know, he wants to keep his daughter away from that, whereas Arturo, he grew up with it, and he's more tied into it from a cultural perspective. Where the Matadors, we kind of see as the story goes along, it's really a result of these traumas that he's had in his life and that he carries with him. And in the miniseries we're doing now, Once Upon Some Monsters in Mexico, that one opens up with the Matador, and they're kind of training the daughter to be a bullfighter, and the Matador gives his own perspective of it, and it's a little more harsh than Arturo's, which is poetic. So I guess, you know, that's kind of how we balance it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What's really nice about there, and then as a psychologist, we try to measure what we call individual differences, and you can call them personality dimensions, whatever you want to call it. But it's not like there's an event and there's a way to see it. You know, we all have, and I do believe in human types. I do believe that Big Five is not that bad of a measure. And it measures things like neuroticism, openness to experience, conscientiousness. I forgot the other two, but it's not a bad, it puts people in groups, and we might not like that. But what you see in any good story is different people having different reactions to the same thing. And what I love about these two reactions is they're both going to still do the job. So the tension is still there. And, you know, Sarah, you talked earlier about moral wounds, right? One guy's got moral wounds. He's judging the hell out of himself for doing this job. And the other person may not have it as a moral wound because of some difference in terms of who they are. And I just, that's one of the great things about stories, I think, is to put these different types of human systems into motion with each other and let the magic happen, the tragedy happen, the success happen, right? All of it, while simultaneously trying not to let the author's voice be seen, trying not to be morally heavy-handed, but let the characters just speak, which is so hard to do. Most people start writing because they want to say something, right? They want to judge
Yeah.
something, and the moral heavy hand comes out, and but no, I think that's a really good way to point out individual difference. Anyone else want to respond to Emilio's question about how do we stay true to a cultural signifier? The answer can be no. That's perfectly fine. Are there any other questions out there in the audience? All right, Emilio, did you have any other questions? You can say no. I'm just making sure the house is cool, you know.
I not a pointed question, but I did want to call back to what I had jotted down in my notes as Dr. Roldan's infectious enthusiasm and joy at the representation of Guatemalan people, place, and culture. And just as sort of like a little, I don't know, question for Mr. Prince is, how does hearing that kind of stuff make you feel as a creator who is representing a culture that is not your own?
Yeah, it's I mean, like I said, I think when she said it, it's great, because it really do take a lot of care to it. And like I said at the beginning, a lot of the impetus for the book and the character and the way it's portrayed was, the reaction from my friend who was, very kind of upset at stereotypical reactions. I do have friends who look at it. Dr. Teresa Rojas, who's a professor at Modesto Junior College, she did a study guide for us, and she's been someone who I lean on sometimes for cultural stuff. There are things, in a story you do take liberties, right? But at the same time, there are certain liberties that you want to make sure that you're not doing something that that would be offensive or whatever. But the one trick I always not necessarily trick, but I always kind of remind myself that he's a Mexican, he's from Mexico, and he is fighting for Mexico. So his perspective is not the typical action movie, I'm an American hero, I'm doing this, whatever. So I always try to put myself in that mind, in that mindset of, okay, well, how would he be approaching it? How would he as a character be doing it? So and how would he react, or what are the challenges he would face? So yeah, it's something, it's always on the top of my mind, and I've been fortunate to have a really great kind of support system who I can lean on when I do have those questions. Like for instance, in the story that's coming up, we're kind of looking at the mystical aspect of Mexico, which is a very important part of the culture. And it's something that, I do a lot of research and whatever, but there are also things where I want to make sure, like, I'm not just kind of doing something that comes off like a trope, because so many, we get so used to portrayals of things, and even as time has gone on, they've become so ingrained that we don't even think of them as being tropes. We think of them as being real because that's what we've seen over and over and over and over again. So yeah, I do have a lot of help in that regard, and I do a lot of research. So
just the point you made there, you ask people.
Yeah,
right?
you
What's
ask.
it like to be you?
It's,
You know, I mean, you just the simple act of asking.
Yeah.
My favorite movie ever is Princess Mononoke. And the main character, all he does is walk around, hey, what's it like to be you today? That's the first question out of his voice. Of course, he's a killer too, right? Because when he sees a samurai destroying a village, he goes and he takes care of him. But So, any other questions or comments? And if we don't have any, that's fine. We can go ahead and close the conversation. Sarah, Edcel, any final comments?
I will just like to thank Steven for representing my people. As you can tell, like Billy say, as it is, I'm very joyful. But it was just the fact that you can count with your fingers how many comic books, movies, or any media represent us correctly and respectfully. So for that, I thank you. And also the other part as a psychologist that I love is like the animosity that it was so well put in there. Like, you know, like you said, you make somebody that is very proud Mexican Matador. And the other one like, no, man, I don't like this. So I just love that. And I know it's difficult when you are not from that culture and the fear of like you say, I don't want to offend nobody or anything. But you know, I wouldn't accept the offense with the exchange that you put somebody that looks like me. So
Yeah.
thank you for that so much. And like I say, my nose is not represented enough.
Yeah, there you go.
I actually love that nose conversation. I thought that
Yeah,
was
that's great.
awesome.
Yeah.
That was really, really cool. How about you, Edcel? Any final comments?
Yeah, Steven, I just wanted to thank you. Beautiful work, amazing. Like before we started this, I told you I was hooked from page
Yeah.
one. I thought the concept was really cool. It's been a long time since I've read something that I was really hooked on. I think if I was thinking of media wise, I would say Godzilla minus one, for example. It really reminded me a lot in that same essence, kind of like, yes, the Kaijus are there, but through the need to be able to defeat this giant beast, and the people realize and the emotion and labor that came into joining together, banding together to defeat, you know, in the case of Godzilla to defeat him, but in the case of Monster Matador to defeat this giant wave of monsters, it really got me hooked in the storytelling element, the way it was beautifully illustrated. So honestly, I laughed, I cried, I got super excited with the story itself. Even so, you know, it was really good. I just wanted to thank you. This is incredible work.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Well,
I mean,
go ahead.
thank you for having me.
No, I got a few more announcements before we duck out here. I want to encourage everybody to join us for next month for LGBTQ plus History Month, when we get to discuss My Favorite Thing is Monsters 2. If you've not read My Favorite Thing is Monsters, you're just missing out. Emil Ferris will be joining us. She's the writer, illustrator of My Favorite Thing is Monsters. It's award-winning, it's phenomenal, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. So she'll be here, and it's actually a week from tonight. That's how October worked out. And joining us at that conversation will be Maisha Orthy, who's an ISU alum, and then Fadia Osman, who's a PhD student in our school psychology program. We might have another guest or two, but for right now, those are the folks that are going to be there. And I highly recommend you read that book, even if you don't come to see us at ReggieCon. Please take a look at it because it's amazing work. So it's out. Dr. Sara Rodan, thanks so much for joining us in our ReggieCon celebration of Latinx Heritage Month. We really appreciate everything you brought to the table. I will never forget the nose discussion. I just thought that was brilliant. I'm so glad you were here, and I'm so glad you pointed that out. And this is a part where you guys already said things, so we'll move up from there. Stephen, it was an absolute thrill and blast for you to join us tonight, share your work with us, and thanks for doing so, and we look forward to next time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you out there who joined us. Thanks for helping us celebrate Latinx Heritage Month. Until next time, have a good evening. Bye-bye.